Hello.
Hello.
How are you, Robyn?
I am Peachy. How are you doing, Stephen?
I'm doing all right. We're, you know, World War III
Yeah.
potential and everything, but all of that said, something that kind of came across the internet, and you've been writing about is sort of the Republican child abuse bills that I think we've kind of been too cutely calling "Don't Say Gay," but are overtly horrible type stuff. You've written about that, and also in connection to some gender affirmative care that
Yeah.
Republicans are doing. I know, and this is also something you've mentioned as well, of how the window was pushed. So first, it was kind of like when talking about abortion, it was like Democrats were saying, "Oh, of course, the most moderate, sensible position is to kind of maybe say, of course, children should get parental consent for having an abortion. 13-year-old girl should get. We can agree on that because then we will look really bad if we were to say otherwise." And when the folks who caved on that,
Hmm.
a lot of people were saying they're not going to end there. What's going to happen is that
Oh, yeah.
the
Well,
parents who agree
yeah.
to support a 13-year-old, of course you should get this abortion. This is good, this is good for you for any reason, forget rape or whatever, for any reason, you should do this. Now they're actually guilty of child abuse. So that was
Mhm.
always the dodge. It's not about parental rights. It's about doing. And so can you speak to that a bit?
Well, pretty much anything I've noticed that's about parental rights is basically about parental rights to control kids' lives in a way they should not be able to, which does
Mhm.
include reproductive care and certainly does include their gender identity. One of the things that was supposed to go into the bill this week, the Don't Say Gay bill, was a thing where they were going to notify the parents of kids who came out within 6 weeks.
Mhm.
Like, which means like those kids could get kicked out of their house. Like this is Florida we're talking about here. This is like people say, oh, Florida's not the South. Florida's absolutely the damn South.
Oh yeah.
Especially the top of it. But that's
Yeah. I
they
mean,
actually still wanted to hold on to that, and they're like, no, this is fine. Parents should know that their kids are gay or trans so that they can kick them out of the house if that is
and
what
if
they
they
decide.
don't do that, then they'll charge
Yeah,
them with some other crime, like we saw the trans bill. Okay, well now you're abusing the child. So it's just like,
yeah,
I mean, to not to defend Florida, but it was the difference between 30,000 votes. I mean, this is how Republicans govern,
yeah.
right? So DeSantis governs if he won by 70%, like it's West Virginia or something, where you're really 30,000 votes. And it wasn't like DeSantis versus, a Nelson type character. It was like Andrew Gillum, who was, I think, Sanders had supported, and it was fairly overtly liberal in certain ways that are considered not, that moderates would say, oh, held back on, but he's still like 30,000 points, 30,000 votes. And it was, um, he had some, scandal issues towards the end there that could have made the difference. But it doesn't matter. DeSantis has like governed for the past 4 years. It's really like a want of a nail situation because of the kind of awful policies from COVID now to this
Mhm.
that he's done. Just basically within a point or half a percentage point of a victory. So it's terrible. But yeah, I mean, his I think his communication director is just
Oh
a nut,
yeah, yeah.
talking about calling it an anti-grooming bill. And that goes to my criticism. I thought "Don't Say Gay"
Horrifying.
was too
Yeah.
cute by half. It's really a child abuse bill or a abuse of gay children. It's not about we won't say gay and everything's okay. It's like no, no, no. You're literally trying to make lives for them as horrible as possible. And
Well, part of it
but
is also that, like, they don't want to acknowledge the existence of gay people,
oh
even
yeah,
like in history classes. They're like, well, if we just tell kids that gay people, like, if we never mention gay people, then those kids will never be gay.
oh yeah, and
Is
and it's
really
a
what I think.
humiliating.
Although, you know, it's not like we were talking about gay liberation when I was in high school, which we should have been. Like, but yeah, no, there were still gay people. Like, it's not like.
Well, yes, they want these kids. And I think the challenge is you have to address, like, this is not about they mean well or just different. It's an after school special.
Mhm.
You meet a person and they'll change their minds. They're just overtly bad people and are trying to hurt gay people.
Yeah.
The theater I'm involved with in Portland, Playhouse, had done a production of Thurgood, and something that was very interesting in the production, the character playing Thurgood Marshall, and he's describing Thurgood Marshall actually was born the year my grandfather was born, so it's always like you think of like the type of world my grandfather, not many generations ago, kind of grew up in.
Yeah.
But he's talking about how he describes the world as about humiliation. So often the legal term is not
Mhm.
so much segregation, but humiliation of a group of people. And I think that's what we're seeing
Yeah.
here. It's like the compete. We want to humiliate you. We don't want you to feel any sort of sense of belonging or place. And that's what the whole purpose is.
Oh,
And
absolutely. Yeah.
going back to DeSantis's, press person who would be fired under some of the stuff she's tweeted under a different world, or if we have the powder to go after her. I mean, because if a Democratic governor's press sector was saying some of the stuff this woman has said, they'd be gone and be
She's
asked every
a
day.
human being. Like,
But she's saying stuff about, it seems to be QAnon stuff, the stuff that you've written, like
oh yeah.
literally talking about
Well,
the
she
child
wants to frame it as an anti-child grooming bill, and I will say it again. I knew that the whole like grooming thing was going to go in a bad direction. I knew it as soon as people started saying it. It was going to go the same direction as like gaslighting, which now literally means nothing. It means any like.
well,
These words go through this process.
yeah.
Of, oh my God, we have just handed, you know.
Well, a slight diversion of that. So explain that your position on this to me, because I got the I was somewhat, oh, I get grooming because certain things sounded weird to me, like Elvis Presley adopting his future wife, or like Prince I think dated his first wife. He met her when she was 16, and then they were literally in a relationship by all standards, but he was like, no sex until you're 18. But it's like, well, you're still like a guy in your 30s who's on the phone with the 16-year-old every night, and she's presenting this as romantic, but it's like that just seems kind of creepy to
Yeah.
me. And
Oh,
so
yeah.
that was what I was thinking of.
Grooming is literally a thing. It just became a buzzword for a minute, and like a lot of the time, what happens is people like get a word and they love it so much that they use it for everything, and then all of a sudden, that word no longer has any meaning. And what she's trying to claim basically is that if you tell children that gay people exist, then you are grooming them to be taken advantage of sexually by gay people who are going to prey on them. Like, it's basically, she thinks all gay people are child molesters.
Yeah. And again, that's the QAnon thing. Like she's
Yeah.
like, and I feel like again, it's this idea of just ignore. I get when I write about Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren Boebert, inevitably there'll be someone in the comments who will be like, "Why are you even talking about her or Wendy Rogers or all these other people?" It's like they exist and they have quite a So I think you were probably getting that when you were talking about QAnon. Like, oh, this is no big thing. Why not talk about the Liz Cheneys? And like 2 years later, QAnon is a more dominant, to the point where it's normalized, to basically, to me, the escalation to where the press is calling people they're accusing people of being pedophiles. It's QAnon stuff that's become part of the actual rhetoric. And to me, it's like, how are Democrats supposed to engage with people where it's acceptable, if that's an acceptable basic to say that everyone who opposes this bill is what, then you should not, like, that doesn't make any sense to me. Like, why are you engaging with people who are calling you pedophiles?
Yeah.
Like they're overtly
basically, we're trying to do this whole actually I think she literally did say, if you're against the anti-grooming bill, you are probably a groomer, or at least you don't denounce the grooming of 4 to 8-year-old children. Silence is complicity. This is how it works, Democrats. I didn't make the rules. And like,
Well, she's a pleasant woman. So yeah, I mean, it's not actually grooming. And what's tragic here, to the extent of what it matters, I think either this week or last week was Pedro Zamora's 50th. Would have been Pedro Zamora's
mhm,
50th birthday for those of us who are not
yeah,
remember um,
real
from
world.
the world. He was HIV positive. He was a young man. He was 22 at the time. He did tremendous advocacy work during the time he had
Mhm,
AIDS. Sadly, passed away. Judd Winnick was someone when I was in college, and he was speaking. I had a chance to meet with him. He was a really, really lovely man, Judd Winnick, and he was friends with Pedro.
yeah.
And I highly recommend his book, Pedro and Me. But something that when Pedro talks about his life, it's he's a guy who was gay. He was a gay, and there was no community for him.
Mhm.
He was it was, in other words, he was in a world where no one cared about you but other people in a situation, and so it was like, well, you if your goal is to stop people from making bad choices or being whatever, making them feel like they don't matter and they suck
And
is
trying
going
to isolate them is not a good, no, it's not a very helpful way to do that.
to,
Like,
it seems to be like your goal is to just isolate and marginalize and humiliate people. It is not about their well-being. And again, it goes back to what I was saying. Marshall was talking about with segregation, everything, all of it, no matter what, how they ever dress it up and everything, it all goes back to humiliating, demonizing
mhm.
people, and that's the end result. There's
Oh, yeah.
not about
Well,
protecting.
also, what happens with this thing is the same kind of thing that happens with the QAnon stuff, where it becomes a game of telephone. Like, someone, that my dad was talking to somewhere. Like my dad talks to just people. He'll go places and just talk to people. It's what he does. But he was talking to someone who was like, "Oh no, the bill in Florida is so they don't teach children how to do fellatio because that's what they want to do. They want to teach the children how to give blowjobs." And my dad was like, "That is definitely not what it like.
Mhm.
No." He was like, "I will check with my daughter, but I am very sure that's not a thing." But they were like, the guy was absolutely very sure that that is what the bill was. And Democrats were like, "No, we want children to learn how to give blowjobs." Like,
Wasn't that sort of the banana thing? There was something in the 90s or whatever where
oh
there
yeah,
was
that was the condom thing. Yeah, putting. Oh, and that was like a big debate too. They were like, "Oh my God, you're going to teach children how to put condoms on?" Yes, there's a freaking. Once again, like freaking Republicans are like, "Well, a lot of people are dying, but what if we did nothing?"
well, the idea is to pretend
Like,
that if
yeah,
you're good, you won't get this. If you
yeah,
don't, just teach you how you should teach you not to have sex,
yeah.
to
Which
fight
is, of course,
every
what
impulse that a kid is going to have and something. Um, and yeah, the similar to the anti-trans bills, again targeting trans women
mm,
specifically, because there are no trans. They rarely do the reverse of that of trans men. About I presume those bills
yeah,
would also include trans men, but the focus. So when Kim Reynolds, it was Christine Nome, I think, who had the signing with all of
yeah.
these white girls. I mean, granted, South Dakota, but all these white cis girls, and saying this is who we're protecting and everything from essentially the rare, and they can't even name a situation where this has actually
No,
occurred.
because they made it up. They're
um,
like, "Oh, well, you can't have children in bathrooms with trans people, like, but like little boys are in bathrooms with men all of the time." Like, they're
oh yeah,
like, "Oh, like they children, women can be child molesters, cis women can be child molesters, heterosexual men can be child molesters, and they can actually like it's not necessarily a sexual preference situation for the most part when you're dealing with that. It's just straight up abuse. But they just always want they love doing the "oh but the children" thing, and it has nothing to do with "oh but the children." they want to use that as an excuse to be able to, hurt people in some way. And now one thing that, we talked about earlier, and actually in Utah, the Republican governor of Utah is planning on vetoing the ridiculous anti-trans bill, the Kristi Noem style trans bill, that anti-trans bill that their legislation just passed, which I think is pretty awesome. Like, good for him. Good for you, Spencer Cox. Congratulations. And we were talking about how,
that's impressive because Mitt Romney, senator from there, supports these anti-bill. There was a hearing where he was saying, I don't always agree with Rand Paul, but here I do. And I was like, so the one area you agree with this complete asshole is on, misgendering and hurting trans kids. That's wonderful. Congratulations for you. So that's interesting that the governor
they're so bizarre. But I thought that was interesting in light of you covered a couple weeks ago, Dave Weigel saying, well, if Democrats want to win elections, then they should throw trans people under the bus and support these great Kristi Noem type initiatives where trans kids can't play sports. Like,
he had joked about because obviously a white cis male should joke about something that is of great concern to the actual existence of other people who you aren't. Like, it's always this sort of thing of, why can't I joke about this? And it's like, well, think about the fact that you're joking, you're making light of something that doesn't affect you. It's kind of like when I realized years ago, like, maybe I shouldn't joke about being homeless because I am lucky enough to not actually be in that position. And there are people who really literally are sleeping. Like, if I lose my job, I'm probably not going to be homeless, but there are people who are going to be homeless. Maybe let's not joke about it. It's not funny. But he was sort of saying that, and I mentioned this in the article, was like, he was, oh, well, everyone went crazy on Twitter. I was mentioning that Democrats used to fold on this sort of thing, but here they probably won't. And but it's like, but he was presenting it as a sense of within his, he and others like Matt Iglesias and Josh Barrow have often sort of said that Democrats, their problem is they listen too much to their staff, who are often people of color and more liberal than they are, and they are pursuing unpopular policies. So what Weigel said, you can't distract that from this other thing of basically saying it's another example of, hey, maybe back in the good old Sister Soldier days, they would have thrown trans people under the bus and that would have helped them, except it wouldn't.
And it never did. And, now we've got a Republican governor saying, I'm not okay with that either, because what's going to happen with that, as with literally every other thing in that same vein, is give it enough years, everyone is going to think that it is gross and weird to not let kids play sports because, of the gender they were assigned at birth. And everyone is going to agree with that. And so any Democrats who did jump on that train would later be punished for it, just like they, later
but they don't. We don't hold Republicans accountable for a lot of this, for being wrong for everything.
We also don't vote for them.
Well, conservatives. So the idea of like, here's how wrong you were about segregation, or about, conservatives can kind of come out and pretend they would have liked MLK despite all the data at the time and how they opposed John Lewis at the time and everything. And so we're never sort of like, morally, you guys are always wrong. It's very hard for us to make that argument towards them. And I think the biggest issue was when guys like Weigel and Barrow and Iglesias, they pursue this, they call it populism. I think David Shore sort of said this, and this is the idea that somehow these issues are distractions. And we're talking about human lives, but they're distractions. And if you just focus on these economic issues that are popular, you would win and get, and they're focused on the left.
Also don't like the economic issues, to be clear.
Yes. Um,
You know,
yes, because obviously Josh Barrows is more right leaning and other, but
yeah,
there's a sort of white broness along all political policies
yeah,
that somehow that's not. I think what it misses is that for the right wing of America, and this goes back when I was talking about having read about Virginia Thomas and her background and everything. It goes back it's all about the social issues. I mean,
yeah,
Phyllis Schlafly is a major figure. Same with Reagan. These are it's not like what's like this idea that Phyllis Schlafly is some sort of her whole thing was social issues. It's not about like economics or and there's some folks who do want to enjoy dancing on the poor. That's certainly Paul Ryan and others, but generally speaking, the right's agenda is pretty clearly white Christian
yeah,
dominance. That's what they want. So believing there's a way to fight this battle without fighting the battle
yeah,
is not, I mean, and I think that goes to, the debates over police violence is this idea that we can chip around the edges and not embrace the actual issue. Eli Mistel has a piece about
yeah.
this cover about the idea of like, well, if Biden said that he has Black people's back, now would be the time to show it. I mean, Biden has non-sustainable levels of support amongst Black voters. I think it was like in the 60s at some point. We need to be
Mhm.
like in the 80s or so. And what was so fascinating about the defund thing, because what white moderates, and I've written about this, will officially say is that slogan alone made it impossible for us to do anything. We would have definitely done something if only we hadn't. And when I ask, like, what do you mean by that? Because I'm not even saying I support the slogan or whatever.
Mhm.
I'm saying what's the better slogan? They use different slogans. They use
Yeah.
different reform or this. It's like, well, what do you think this looks like?
Reform is code for we're doing absolutely
Oh yeah.
nothing. Like that is unless the word welfare is in front of it and we're screwing over poor people.
Well,
Like,
yeah, it's this idea that also when you talk to, I think a lot of white moderates and even white liberals, there's a interesting thing of when you talk to them, you get to a sense of they really do fundamentally believe in propaganda. So the
mhm,
idea that the police are wonderful, great keepers of peace officers, and there's just a few random, like Derek Chauvin came to work and was nuts,
yeah.
but that's,
That came from nowhere. It's just, the one bad guy.
so
And
it's not a
like, yeah,
systemic issue that you have to dismantle. So
because
it's
no one
kind of
wants it
like,
to be a systemic issue. Of course, they don't want it to be a systemic issue because if it's a systemic issue, then it requires a systemic solution. If it's like, hey, this was just a bad guy,
and that's something
an
you can do
individual, because Americans love their individualism.
without getting
Then
the police pissed off, right?
yeah,
You could somehow engage them without, but there's not. The police understand this. They understand that Derek Chauvin represents them and
but also
predominantly what they do. And when they sort of say every time, it's like, we can't have a chokehold on someone, we can't do this, we can't solve crimes, we can't do
yeah,
anything. And so it's very clear that they believe this. But it's interesting, there's sort of this corporate, I mean, people don't like the term corporate dem, but you do get the sense of like the corporate's idea that, oh, the defund's a bad slogan. It's like downsizing versus right sizing. So in corporate America, when I worked in corporate
yeah,
America, sense of, okay, well, now we're saying right sizing. And I was sort of like, well, okay, I can call it that, but you understand that everyone still gets they're losing their jobs. Like,
yeah.
just so this idea that somehow you can
Like
say
they're not going to be like, oh, I don't have a job anymore, but also I didn't lose my job.
it was right size. So somehow
Yeah,
saying like, oh, we're demilitarizing, we're doing all this sort of stuff is supposed to fundamentally make cops not, they understand and they come out front, but it just runs up a vicious circle. It's like,
and
okay,
they
well,
don't want reform either. And I do need to make one thing clear: the people who are like, well, it's just like one bad apple, clearly do not understand what that saying is about or what it means. Is like one bad apple spoils the whole bunch, not like one bad apple
yeah.
just like kind of sucks and you throw it out and everything's fine.
Well, there's
Like,
such a rally of the flag. I mean, the people who support it, Chauvin, who
yeah,
support like any police fight, the cops don't suddenly say, yeah, this guy's terrible. But I mean, 3 cops watched him kill some. They watched him commit a crime, and obviously you said they have no obligation to stop crimes. They watched him commit a crime,
Mhm.
thinking this is okay. And that leads to the other point that really bugged me about Biden talking about funding the police more, because it keys into the larger. And the New York Times has an article today that I don't want to bother giving much credit to, but again, reinforcing the cop in Canada thing about you have to do both to preserve, to reduce crime, more police on the streets, more. And it's like, why can't anyone connect the dots that
Hey, you know what actually does reduce crime? I learned earlier this week, welfare.
yes, well, the idea that the more cops, why did Derek Chauvin even meet George Floyd? Was George Floyd,
Yeah.
running from had he just robbed a bank? Had he raped a woman and was escaping, in the middle of a rape? Was he about to shoot someone? No, he was. Someone called the cops because he tried to pass a fake 20, where he was the victim of
Mhm.
that, because
Yeah.
he worked as a bouncer. That's again the idea of how we criminalize poverty. So
Mhm.
I have not actually handled physical money in the longest time. I use Apple Pay or cards. I don't think I've ever, and
Mhm.
I've never paid with dollars. So there's certain type of professions where you're going to get paid in cash. And if you
Yeah.
get paid in cash, there's a chance that you're probably going to get a bad bill at some point.
Yeah.
You did not commit a crime. You just got
Like,
screwed.
he wasn't, like, at home printing his own money.
No,
Like,
he got screwed out of
yeah.
$20, and that should have been it. But instead, it becomes, and so you wind up with a SWAT
And
team
then
of
yeah.
4 officers over a guy who should never have been arrested. It should have just been a civil thing of like, okay, it's 20. We're taking the 20. We will contact you later
Yeah.
upon confession if there's something or whatever. I mean, but because of that criminalization of poverty, criminalization of a low level offense, he is dead.
Yeah.
Elijah McClain, a guy walking in his neighborhood, was reported for looking suspicious. Then he's dead. Breonna Taylor, no not warrant for drugs, but nothing connected to her specifically. So all of these things comes into over policing, and who suffers most are poor communities, predominantly Black people live in those poor communities, because
Mhm.
and when people talk about communicating the police issue, something that, even though everyone whines about defund or bad slogan or whatever, something that all Democrats could have leapt on, that Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez said very early on in 2020, was that everyone wants to be secure in themselves, free of ever. What actually we want is the same police experience that white people in the
Yeah.
suburbs have. That's it. And if that's what Democrats should focus on, and that's what Biden should focus. I mean, Biden did, and then he just stopped. But the idea is that the experience
Yeah,
of
it's a very, very different experience entirely. Like, and so you have people who like have this generally good or experience with cops. They never see cops,
Mhm.
you know. Like most of them, the last time they saw a cop was when the cop was like hosting their DARE program in school. Like you don't see them that often if you live in the suburbs. They're not like walking around your block. They're not, you don't feel like you live in a police state.
Yeah.
And so and their experience is you see the police if you are the one who calls 911.
Mhm.
Um, and that is not the experience of Black people, of people of color, of people who live in cities. It's an entirely different experience. You're not like, oh, the police have come here to save me.
Yeah,
And so when
that's something
people,
you would want to abolish if you live in. And white people, and you've written about this in the sense of we could have seized upon when white people selectively were saying, well,
yeah,
this is unfair with what happened at the January 6th or prison conditions. White people do get the sense of fundamental
yeah,
unfairness. Yes, most of them are
only
probably,
when it happens to them.
and say that Black people should still deserve to be over policed. Fine. Let them own up to that. Let them admit that, yes,
Yeah.
Black people, this is for Black people. It's related to the slave patrols. We're still containing Black people.
Mhm.
Let them own up to, like, push the fact of like, no, in these neighborhoods where kids are not doing anything. You know why you wind up with kids saying, we don't like the cops. We
Mhm.
want to abolish the cops, because you would want to abolish um, a sense of every time in your neighborhood you're getting stopped, frisked, and even the sainted Capitol Police. Like
Mhm.
interview with Mr. Fanone, former Officer Fanone, and he was that's what they were doing. And they go into DC, they see these kids, you frisk a kid, you do, it's essentially like what the literal prison experience is.
Yeah.
So Jenna Ryan thinks it's so unfair for her in prison. She's actually been convicted of sentenced to a prison sentence, but the only sentence is that you are either black or, in the best case scenario, you're just poor. You live in this
Mhm.
neighborhood, and the sentence is that you're under constant surveillance. There's a warden who's going to pick you off. I often make this example because having lived in white neighborhoods, suburban neighborhoods, I was
Mhm.
this lady was like talking, a neighbor, she's talking in the yard. She's like, "Oh, hi, Steve." And she comes out with a glass of wine. She's sipping wine, talking to me on the street. And it's something that, as a conditions, what I would never do because I know, according
Yeah.
to penal code X, Y, Z, this is open. You're violating open container, and of course, no cop is going through the neighborhood to catch. But if you're a black kid on a stoop,
Yeah.
any simple. So again, Eric Garner was just the level of low level offenses that white people commit in their suburban neighborhoods that don't get escalated because you're not under constant surveillance. So that's what should be shut down. But instead, it's like we should fund more of that so that cops can
Mhm.
do more of this. I mean, that was the whole thing with Ferguson. I mean, that's what is an
Yeah.
opportunity force. But instead, Democrat position is we should do more of this. That will somehow make white people in those suburban feel safer. And why? How does it feel safer? It's not like are we putting more police in your neighborhoods? No, we're putting more police in neighborhoods you don't go to. And I feel like Democrats are
Because
afraid
they're like, well, they
on
see it
that.
as containment, basically.
Yeah, to just argue that's containment. If you believe that makes the world safer, then you submit to that. You
Yeah.
submit your child, your two daughters coming back from cheer practice or
Yeah.
whatever, walking home to be stopped by cops asking, "Oh, you're walking across, you're
Mhm.
walking, and I'm gonna throw you
Yeah.
on the ground." I mean, Amber Ruffin has so many stories of this
Mhm.
worth watching. Before she got her talk show, she talked about the experiences she had had as a black woman and her sister and sort of things of like that over policing is a that's what has to be dismantled. That's what needs to be broken apart. And so the sense of like you have to break through the propaganda of combining those two things together. But the problem is it's all rooted in that type of
Mhm.
attainment of the poor. It's the idea of like, you know, the whining, and it just infuriates me. So the whining from people who live in San Francisco or New York or these states where the housing, like San Francisco specifically, we're talking about like
Yeah.
300% levels of like, so people lost their homes. The economy is such, it's an economic situation. So, and same with Portland, all these cities, Seattle, everything you can link to how
Mhm.
rising housing costs, cutting down of other social systems, create a system where you have these people living, and the solution is they believe like I don't want to see it, so just the cops can come and route. Well, what is as much you don't enjoy seeing people who don't have homes or people who are addicts,
Yeah.
it's not a capital offense. They can't be murdered. They can't be locked away forever. So what is your solution? But they really believe that more money for policing resolves it. I mean, the police believe the same thing. I've talked to
Yeah.
cops
Well,
like
because
that.
they also like more money and more funding for like what they do. Of course they duh.
Yeah, I mean, and what does that do to you if your job is to essentially, and I hate if I'm part of that, if we're part of that
Mhm.
system, like I want to live in a city, but I don't want to see homeless people. So I want cops to roust up all the homeless people between, say, 4 a.m. when I've come home from
Yes.
last call to 7 a.m. when I get up to go to the gym. You've roused away all the homeless people. But that's people like, that's a horrible thing for other human beings to do
Yeah.
to other human beings. Let's find another solution. It's still a public health. I don't like camps. I don't like it. It's not a public. It's a horrible public safety issue. And I think you've mentioned build more homes, build something to
Well,
keep
I mean, we
here.
have a lot of empty homes in America. Like we have more empty homes than we have like homeless people. like you know, we know for a fact that actually does work, but we don't want to do it because it's not a satisfying answer to people. Because like it's not this, like, people want to hear the bootstrap story. They don't want to hear we gave people something and then they were more okay. No one likes that story. It's not satisfying. And apparently we have to base all of our policy on what is like cathartic and emotionally satisfying for people. Even, you were bringing up the fact that Democrats didn't, jump on the, you take the opportunity to address issues in prison and with policing. Part of that is because people would actually get mad at me for saying, hey, no, these conditions are not okay for anyone and they should not exist, because, well, no, this is our time for schadenfreude and we're supposed to be able to do our schadenfreude now. And you know and I understand that it feels good, but I'm not entirely sure how helpful it is.
No, yeah. I
Like,
mean, I have no sympathy for Jenna Ryan. I have no sympathy
no,
for the situation, but at the same time, it's like at least let's take advantage of that to again
yeah,
press the issue. I mean, I don't want to
we have a
hear
better chance
about
of
defunding.
doing.
I don't want to hear about defunding as a bad slogan
Yeah.
when and because one, it's like come up with a better slogan. No
Mhm.
one was stopping you. Again, you're talking about random activists saying a slogan. Whereas every year, Republicans, every election cycle, Republicans would come out talking about, I'm going to ban all abortions, including the rape. And you'd have someone with no exceptions for rape. And someone would come out and be like, oh, well, that's too much. We're just going to ban most of them. And then that would be the moderate position.
Yeah.
And you'd be like, oh, well, that's the Republican we could vote for, that Alan Alda looking Republican. And then we'll, I don't really want to talk about abortion, even though everyone I'll nominate will be anti-abortion, that
Yeah.
type of, So the fact that you can't do that or beat back against that is sort of, okay, well, you're bad at messaging
Yeah.
more so than the other fact. It's like,
No, it wasn't like you were gonna, you know, if it weren't for that rascally Angela Davis, we would have gotten away with it too. No,
yeah, exactly. Anyone talking about his abolition or talking about abolishing cops, the former president of the United States smeared a cop. Yes, I know it was a black cop. But he smeared that cop, said that he had no right to shoot a woman breaking into the Capitol. And I said, like, if Obama never would have done this, but Obama had done something similar while Trump was in office, Trump would have had that cop at the State of the Union.
Oh yeah.
What Trump also would have done, he would have had the women. And if you watch the 4 hours of the Capitol, that's where you will see there were like the ladies who worked for Nancy Pelosi, one woman in particular, it's a woman of color, terrified, believe like these roaming bandits, believe she was going to get raped and murdered. They would be on, at the State of the Union as special guests to constantly remind of the human. Instead, when Democrats talk about January 6th, it's like democracy, democracy, whatever. It's like, no. What wins is the human argument. So you need to be talking about, and it always to me just comes back to, Jess, are you just afraid? You just fundamentally, at a certain point, you believe that this woman of color who worked for Nancy Pelosi just doesn't resonate as much because she's a woman of color. And the marauding bands who she was afraid of being raped by were white dudes who you don't want to offend the white dudes. So that's why you're not like the lowest hanging fruit, which again would be on Fox News every night.
Oh, absolutely.
About they would talk to this woman, the white lady who worked for Kevin McCarthy, and how she was afraid she was going to be raped and murdered. And the last thing, she'd be tears on her streak, I'd be crying, like, oh my God, they were going to kill her. Like, they would have gotten me with it. Like,
and their hearts would just break. And I am reminded of something that Obama said. And when he said, one of the things that like they went on about for years, because he said that, Trayvon Martin could have been his son, or looked like he could have been his son. And they were heartbroken about that. The right was. They were like, how can he even bring this into, like, how can he say that? Oh my God. And I still don't even understand like what point they were trying to make.
He was not supposed to run.
Yeah.
He was never the whole deal for Obama was that he was never
Yeah.
supposed to remind anyone that he was black.
Yeah.
And then there are certain black people who, from Clarence Thomas to whatever, who are willing to sort of look, it's tough enough. Show me the money. Show me where I sign up. I will sell every one of these motherfuckers out.
Yeah.
But help me, here's, contract written in blood. I will do whatever it takes. And Candace Owens is one of the latest ones. But I mean, Clarence Thomas got a Supreme Court seat out of it. I mean, Candace Owens gets like a sandwich and $4. So her soul is like eBay buy
A
now
lot
for
cheaper.
like
Yeah.
$2. All right, I guess. It's like her soul is like sort of the eBay impulse. Like I'm bored at home and I'm like, oh, I can get her soul right now for $2. Done. So that but Obama would occasionally break the rule and be like, this is a situation I have experienced, I can understand, and yes, it's a shame. I'm imagining my black son, which again, if it was if Trayvon Martin had been a white woman out for a jog in
Yeah.
a neighborhood, and I'm neighborhood captain of my neighborhood. There's been some robberies in my neighborhood. If I know who lives in my neighborhood, but there's no point where I'm supposed to say, and this is kind of the larger point, right? There's no point where I get to say, wait a minute, Robyn running in my neighborhood, I've never seen her before. She doesn't belong in my neighborhood.
To be fair, no one's seen me running before.
let me chase after her, and then she dies. Obviously I would not be convicted. Obviously I was protecting myself. I mean, it's laughable. But
Yeah.
in that situation, it's like, of course,
Of course he was frightened. It was a black kid in a hoodie.
yes. And then I remember a lot of moderates at the time being like, oh, well, that jury of white ladies, they're mothers. They'll empathize with George Zimmerman, not with Trayvon Martin. That's what's going to happen. No, of course not. They won't.
No, of course that's no. Like, I mean, half of the, most horrific racism that has been done in this country has been done in the name of protecting white women.
Oh yes. So they know what the what the score is. But yeah, it's that was sort of what Marjorie Greene had said about the with the trans bills or something out fantasizing about how her husband, like, this is pure evil. These kids, these men pretending to be women, horrible misgendering, men pretending to be women, showering next to these children, and that's sick and it's evil. And if I heard about it, first thing I do, my husband would go and beat. So
Yeah.
it's this weird thing of like, okay, well, this is something that is not a crime, and your reaction to something that's not a crime, not even possibly going to be a crime, is to commit violence. But somehow that's justified. That trans woman's existence, and there are trans women who are terrified. There are no stories. There are more stories of men like Marjorie Greene's husband beating and killing trans women. Like, let me check my watch.
Yeah.
How many it might have occurred in the past 24 hours compared to these ideas of trans women harming children. And it is just so absurd and insulting. And it just reminded me, it got me really pissed because obviously Marjorie Greene and I are around the same age. I just remember in high school, like I remember I was in a study hall or whatever, and there was these girls, very much Marjorie Greene type girls, sitting in a car talking about how, they were so offended that these black kids had flirted with them and they couldn't wait to go tell their boyfriends, just sort of sick their boyfriends like wild animals on a radar. He's gonna come down here. He's gonna, my boyfriend's gonna come down here. It's gonna, and of course, it's
Emmett Till shit. Like,
I'm sorry. Oh yeah,
that's some Emmett Till shit.
That's 1991, baby. That's not. I mean, this is not. Somewhat. It's a long time ago, 31 years ago. But that's my senior year. I distinctly remember that of like, and I was always of like just. So I was always kind of like, yeah, I don't want to
Yeah.
I don't want to be sort of a sacrificial lamb because one is probably like the guy's probably just bumped into her or looked at her wrong or whatever reason. But it's just like, I mean, William Faulkner wrote about this of like there was the one lady in Absalom who got off watching slaves beat up on each other. And
Yeah, yeah.
there's a sense of violence of like the power of sending this men over to like hurt other men who won't matter. I mean, again,
Mhm.
exactly the Emmett Till thing. Um, but yes, that's what Marshall Lee Green called for. It is far more dangerous than Cory Bush talking about defunding, but we can't categorize and pressure Republicans on how awful these people are because
Because
we're
people,
afraid or we
some
don't.
people think that if we criticize Marjorie Taylor Greene for being super horrible, then all of the other Republicans are going to join her. Like there's some theory there that I'm not getting. Or
Yeah.
if we talk about the normal Republicans more, all of the Republicans will want to be normal Republicans. I don't like the ones who have literally no influence on their party.
Well, there's like a fundamental disconnect, right? So when like again, from Cory Bush to
Mhm.
Maxine Waters was the scapegoat for the longest,
Yeah.
or
Oh yeah.
comes
Now
out
they
and
tend
will
to
say,
love Maxine Waters, and
yeah.
they will right up until Breitbart is very upset with her again.
So she might say something, and even if 99.9% of all elected Democrats don't support that statement, don't support that policy. So again, the Green New Deal became something that everyone had to answer for, even though like there was never a chance of it passing. It was still something Chuck Todd would talk about or pressure Democrats about, and he wouldn't push back on it in a real way. Um, but then what happened, what I noticed, was like as early as 2015, Trump would say, okay, I want to build a wall. Mexicans are rapists. I want to ban Muslims from the country. These horrible things. Now, even though if you looked at exit polling from South Carolina or whatever,
Mhm.
like 40-50% of Republican voters supported these vile, disgusting things he
Yeah.
said, you would get the MSNBC crowd, well, Joe Scarborough said this was inappropriate. That's not conservatism. And so that became somehow acceptable. So the acceptable Republicans who represent nobody, who have no
Yeah.
coalition.
And
So
that's conservative. Like, oh my, I hate that so much. I'm like, no, the conservatism, like the thing that is representative of that viewpoint is the people being horrible. It's like, oh my God, the Raw Story headlines, like 14 a day of like Republican stands up, says other Republicans are bad. Like, and apparently there's some kind of like market for this where like, the Republican is like, I'm the true conservative, and I say Donald Trump is tacky, or like, whatever. Um, and apparently there's just like a very big thirst for this. It's the same thing as when people say like, oh, well, the real Christians aren't like bigoted homophobes or whatever. They're not like the evangelicals and everything, but like, no, those people are also real Christians. Like they believe like the shit they
oh,
believe is in the Bible.
it's a minority of the population, and it's a minority of the group.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a minority of these people who believe this, right? So it's not like they have no and it became like to the point of someone like Nate Silver
Hmm.
during the primary adamantly saying Trump can't win. It's like, well, he's ahead 80%. Maggie Haberman laughed at Keith Ellison's face when there was he said, well, I think he's going to win. He's like ahead. If you look at all of this, it's like because the idea is that the good, the elite said that obviously he can't win. He's too tacky or whatever. And so
Yeah.
and it's still the same. I mean, I don't. And we maybe talk about this a lot, but I'm always stunned by is this mass derangement. So
Mhm.
people still don't take Lauren Boebert or March of the Green seriously. So if I joke they think it's a joke. If I say like, oh well, Lauren Boebert might could be Colorado's next senator, Marjorie Greene could be president, they're like, of course not. The Republican you need to worry about, and it'll be some
It's
polite.
Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley's not going to be president, okay? She's not going to be the nominee. They don't like her. They also don't like Mitt Romney. They don't like Lynn Cheney. Like, they don't like these people.
Everything they're worried about, everyone Democrats get worried about is someone who will never, is not like, okay, maybe that's the Republican you wish. That's the Republican you might wish.
Paul Ryan was, Mitt Romney, like they were always like, oh my gosh, Paul Ryan, he's a real numbers guy. Got to give him that.
No,
I don't even know. People loved that saying, but a ticket with him and like Mitt Romney exploded. Like it was it did not do well. They did not do well at all.
I mean, Obama easily won Wisconsin.
Oh yeah.
Ryan's from there. Well, later Donald Trump won the state. And I think what's interesting is this idea that to me, you look at where the opportunists go, because I kind of figured like around February, so 2021, Marjorie Greene's a true believer. So I figured her still loving Trump, kissing up to Trump, doesn't necessarily reveal anything. But when Elise Stefanik and others who are like, oh, well, I guess it's like, I think they're revealing like, this is where the power is. This is where it's all MAGA. It's all about election fraud. It's all about bashing. Almost same with Ronna McDaniel, and it's revealing of like how much power Trump still has. Like something I was writing for tomorrow. This idea he's spoken for major Republican donors. He's talking about basically trying to frame China. It's like Looney Tunes talk, right? Like he's talking about how, oh well, here's how we could do it. We could put bomb them with F-22s, and the F-22 would say they're from China, make it look like they're from China. Like literally put made in China on obviously American, that a small Russian child would understand.
Wile E. Coyote shit.
Well, I know you have this clever made in China thing on the American device that America has not sold to any of their allies. This is obviously from America. And he's like, then Russia and China would fight each other. It's like he's a gangster. Like he doesn't even try. He's this horrible human being. But the crowd was roaring, laughing. So the problem is not just as Trump. It's like the Republican Party loves this. They love the this is probably a compliment for you and true.
Not and say we did. I think that is a little weird.
Yes. I was
there.
Yes, it's already weird. So I goes at first it was like I thought it was a reasonable compliment, and then yes, but yeah, then it got weird.
Wait, here's one from an actual person that we really nice. I don't know how to do that.
Which one, John Pelosi?
Yeah, the one where he's complimenting us. So
thank you, John Pelosi. Yes, he also feels that Marjorie Greene just claimed in Ukraine the people that are suffering the most are the ones that are dying.
Truer words.
Yeah.
So very observant.
Yes, it's very, a lot of folks are asking about wanting, this goes back, so Trump and the GOP is pushing this line that he's so tough that Putin didn't dare invade while he was president, when he didn't have to. As John Bolton said, Trump planned to withdraw America from NATO in his second term. So his second term, I mean, he would have left Ukraine to twist in the wind. So why why do anything crazy when he could have actually done it? It would have appeared, for all intents and purposes, legal, and America would have just sort of abandoned any kind of
Mhm.
accountability for it. But now there's others who really want to push a sense of, well, why can't we have a no-fly zone? Why can't we
Yeah.
essentially have World War III while dealing with a deranged man? And I get it's frustrating, but it's like, well, you're doing the sanctions. He doesn't like the sanctions. The economy is kind of, but unfortunately, I mean,
Mhm.
what's your take on this? It does appear that the we kind of are used to kind of rolling in and ending the war in like less of a time of a
I mean,
Avenger.
that's we know that's not gonna happen, is the problem. Like, I understand that people are like, "Well, let's just get this whole thing over with, like, lickety split," but, like, that is not how anything works, and, I mean, I think right now we've got a situation where there's no, like, good decision, but I do think that staying out of it militarily, at least for the time being, is the best we're gonna do. And, like, I don't wanna, I right now, Putin is in a situation where, like, nothing there's no, like, upside to, and, like, there's no best case scenario for him.
Mm.
Um, like, the absolute best case scenario for him is a bad time. Um, and I think that that is probably where, it's not like we have him where we want him, clearly not, but I feel like that's our best case scenario, is that his best case scenario is terrible, and
Yeah, I mean,
possibly, like, probably right now his best case scenario is just to leave.
yes, the withdraw, have the exit map. And I think even Ben Sassy, who I don't always agree with, but he has said that it's more like preparing for an insurgency. So essentially, there's potential that Russia will prevail temporarily, but as we saw in Iraq, it's very
Mhm.
hard to hold a place where people hate you, and they actually Iraqis were not as they certainly didn't greet us as liberators, but
No, they did not.
they did not resent us actively as much as especially compared to
Oh,
Hussein,
yeah.
did not as much as this situation where there's nowhere Russian soldiers will never be safe in Ukraine, and like these people want their freedom, and so it is not a long term. His goal of having some wonderful Soviet empire again will never be allowed.
Yeah.
They can't endure the sanctions for long. So at a certain point, but right now it is gonna be pretty brutal and tough.
Yeah.
Um, Joseph, yes,
Horrifying and sad situation, like, nothing about it is good.
listener ministers, we should check out the Republican, of course. American calling for more police, former prosecutor. I don't. I mean,
Well,
yes,
yeah, it's
if you want to make police wealthy, if
yeah.
you want to provide a good union job for people who want to make sure that we don't have good union jobs, but they are, that's great. And it's, but, funding the police does not get you accountability. They resist any accountability.
Mhm.
And responding as if it's just about attacking poverty and containing people. And I think we really need to get to a point of communicating that this is, if you want to live in these situations, you should. Victoria Brownoff, she's a journalist. She lives in Philadelphia, and she subscribed with like the police. It's a a predominantly black neighborhood, it's poor. The police don't respond to crime when they come to her, even in violent crimes. Their move is all they tell her. Essentially, you're and I think a lot of white people, especially white women who live in um, certain predominantly black neighborhoods have gotten this before, or POC neighborhoods. Just move. What are you doing here? Because they have no solution for resolving crime other than their job is to contain these people. That somehow
Yeah.
controls crime. That how reduces gang violence or somehow or anything. That's the sole purpose. So instead, you get people killed during domestic abuses, mental health crises escalate because if you're poor, there's a larger chance your mental health crisis is going to wind up with someone on
because you're not getting the help that you need. No, police officers should not be handling mental health crises and like under any circumstances, unless the person having a mental health crisis is like literally committing a crime.
Well, same with domestic issues, I would think as well.
Yeah.
Between a couple that's a domestic dispute, there's been someone who can kind of reason with the situation or deal with it and and with the option of calling in police help if necessary. But the police instead, it's like there's a fight between two people. This is not going to go well. They aren't trained to de-escalate. They're de-escalate. I mean, de-escalation is not,
that's not what they do.
Breaking someone's arm is not or putting out someone's collarbone is not de-escalating a situation.
No, and like there are a lot of situations in which like police are not the people who should be called, but people don't have an option to call people other than police.
And the comment is like, if you got rid of the cops in those neighborhoods, then it'd just be, it's like the Klan, right? When the Klan was the one was police neighborhoods and whatever. It's like, well, no, I mean, I'm all for rebuilding something up from the ground up. The problem is right now, and I think it's the idea of superficial solutions. So you were getting at that. So it's much easier for, you want an estimate on remodeling your home, and I just tell you, just some small tweaks to your kitchen and your bathroom, and here's the cost. It's really just a renovation. You want to hear that. You don't want me to come and say, look, this house is infested with termites. Here's all the water damage.
The bones are not good. Like
you gotta tear this down and rebuild. It's gonna cost you $500,000, or you might as well move. Like no one wants that. So I mean, I feel like with the police situation, it always becomes this sense of like, well, what's the most minor small tweak we could do? But right now, the idea is that Biden wants to, and others, Democrats want to rain money on cops with no strings.
But I would just like to point out that every other situation on Earth, including ones where that literally would be the best case scenario, people don't want to what are you going to do? Just throw money at it? You're just going to throw money at poor people? Which, no, absolutely. Throw money at that problem. How do you fix problems? You throw money at them. But in this case, no, it's not.
Well,
throwing money at the cops it's not
literally a protection racket. It's like, if you don't leave us alone, we're not going to do anything. And then you're going to see crime rates increase. Not that we actually solved a lot of crimes or focus a lot on violent crimes. If we can't use this chokehold, oh God, what are we in it for? And that type of thing. And
why even wake up in the morning?
Why, Robyn? Why? And so much of this, we talked about this with Jamie last week, the idea of so much of it was happening around COVID, right? So COVID, the knockdowns, everything's shut down. And so, of course, in downtown corridors and certain other places where no one's going and everyone's losing, people lost their jobs and were struggling, you're going to see a corresponding increase in certain crimes, vandalism and stuff like that in areas. And because that occurred around the time that Floyd was murdered, the police seized on that and said, people, the reason downtown is all boarded up and vandalized and there's homeless people everywhere is because, Black Lives Matter hurt our feelings, which is just absurd on its face. So the arguments of rising crime comes from, protesters not liking cops. It's just fundamentally ridiculous. And if teachers were to say this, if teachers were to say, oh, the reason that your kid can't spell and they're in 8th grade is because, oh man, people are so mean to teachers, and it's just hard to teach. It's just really, I can't get motivated.
Get up and teach your kid in the morning. No one else is allowed to, be terrible at their job because people don't like them. Look at all the people who don't like us.
Yes, and we do the best we can. We're desperate people. We try to do, but we're not,
Yeah.
like, look, this is what it is. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I was very frustrated by the State of the Union. I mean, I knew this was happening, and I think it's always frustrating the cycle, right?
Yeah.
So Biden in 2019 was apologizing for the crime bill because that's what you have to do to get elected. And because, as you said, right, like
Yeah.
everyone suddenly starts to agree years later, everything's
Mhm.
bad. And I will say, yes, the crime bill, there's certain things that were positive, like the assault weapons ban, others. But for the most part, there was a lot of
Yeah.
things like removing education for prisoners, because
Mhm.
God forbid you educate prisoners. Um, a lot of really harsh policies and everything. And
Very harsh sentencing policies is really, yeah.
yeah, and criminologists had said the 94 crime bill, when passed, there was already, because of the improving economy, already some of the violent crime was on the downslope. But again, it became popular to connect, and Republicans will love to do that. They want to connect it. They don't want to connect it to the
Mhm.
moderate tax increase amongst the wealthiest. They want to connect that to, oh, crime increased because people cracked heads. Same with,
Yeah.
Giuliani taking credit for a lot of those Clinton era policies slightly helping, and economic issues helping. That's what helped. Like, if it was still a 1970s economy in Giuliani's New York, busting heads was not going to
Yeah.
magically fix everything. So, but the criminalization of poverty, it's just right there. Like every person who
Oh,
died
yeah.
from police violence, it's because, we over police poor
Mhm.
people, predominantly people of color. And so let's stop doing that. Does somehow
Well,
mean you're
I think part of what that is we cognitively understand and have understood since like the days of Plato that there's more crime in areas with like serious poverty issues. And people choose to believe, well, that's because the people who are poor are just naturally more criminal. And that's just more, you know, sort of more comfortable for them to believe than, all of this actually causes crime and is bad because
Mhm.
it's not the narrative they want to hear. Actually, you said criminologist, and that sort of um, made me think of something. The first criminologist was this crazy pants scientific racist guy, Cesare Lombroso. And his big, at the time, I've told you before, like, there's some issues with like North and South Italy, it's like Sharks versus the Jets, but it's also a class issue. And so there was this whole thing like, what is wrong with the south of Italy? Why are there so many criminals there? Like after unification, which is when people were financially devastated. That is why, like, that, thus the diaspora. So instead of saying, well, maybe it's because they're poor, this dude comes up with criminal head shapes. We had criminal head shapes. And he did like all these little drawings of like, well, this is the head shape of a person who is like a law abiding citizen, and this is the head shape of a person who is a criminal. And I'm not even kidding, there are drawings.
Yeah, I've seen those.
It was also the, um, oh, well, the Southern Italians are part black. That was always uh, always thrown in there because people are
Yeah.
racist and horrifying. But yeah, rather than going to like the very, very logical conclusion, they went with head shapes. And that is something that we repeat over and over and over again because we don't like what the solution is.
Oh yeah.
So let's go with criminal head shapes. That's great.
Well, and it's similar in America, right? Like there
No
was a whole
notes.
Republican, again, among good Republicans, it says some sort of pathology or absent fatherhood or something's
Yeah.
wrong, apparently wrong with Black people. That's why they are in the situation they're
Mhm.
in, as opposed to, well, maybe the nation that was built on slavery and segregation is racist,
Yeah.
especially when I mean, people, it wasn't like you came in after the civil rights movement and removed from the levers of
Yeah.
power people who existed. I mean, a lot of the people hiring and levers, I mean, maybe there were some lost change, but they were still the ones who were like used to yes sir, no sir, and
Yeah.
back of the bus. So it takes a while to get over that to suddenly be, but some like they acted, it was like a light switch in 1964, and then suddenly everyone was not racist anymore. And then by 1968, though, Republicans were actively fighting against, okay, well, we need to actively fight against all, these policies or everything, and then blame black people for crime and everything. And so that became what law and order became about, how to
Yeah.
control these neighborhoods and these communities. And that had been what segregation was, controlling and containing these people, treating them as less than human. Uh, you were talking about with Sharks versus Jets. So the musical West Side Story, there was some
Yeah.
conservative critic. There's a whole theme of this of conservative critics who will talk about how, wait a minute, why did commie Tony Kushner, literally that's what I'm called him, commie Tony Kushner and Spielberg make this woke trash? And it's just astonishing because, I mean,
Wait.
the
No.
lyrics, Steve Sondheim's lyrics, which he actually altered from the original Broadway production to the film production.
Yeah.
Film production, it's like calling out, basically the idea of, you they'll look at you twice in America, and
Yeah.
if you're literally white in America, you can succeed. And part of that was part of the struggle, the whole sense of the immigrants, descendants of the Irish who were
Mhm.
accepted into whiteness, and those who weren't
Yeah.
accepted into whiteness. That was kind of the core dynamic. And this is in 1961.
Mhm.
So the idea that this is somehow, but I think conservatives do this. They don't want. I was seeing online the Star Trek Picard had returned, and someone critics were like around my age, who'd grown up watching the show, criticizing it for being too woke. It's like, well, do you remember the original? Like in the 80s is overly, like, obviously Patrick Stewart compared to William Shatner was a clear statement of very 80s leadership. He's English, he's refined and dignified, he's
Mhm.
drinking tea, not beer. Like he's not sitting in a, you know.
Yeah.
So it's just like, but no one wants to accept that, we are not necessarily any more woke than we were before in our art and our culture. um I mean, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think now a lot of people like Ben Shapiro and others are more vocal than they, God help us if they'd been had an option.
Everyone's more loud now. The
Mhm.
thing is that, like, at one point, you didn't hear from everyone. Following social media, you hear from everyone, which means that, like, a lot of, yeah, we've got some terrible people speaking. And then we also have, like, a lot of people who, like, have been, left out of the conversation for a very long time, raising their hand and being like, hello, I actually have a problem with
Well, yes, things that are
what
so
they,
silly that, like, it's like,
I,
oh, this rape joke in return, Revenge of the Nerds, this rape
yeah.
moment, no one had a problem with at the time, or people did. The
They
most
did. I
common,
wasn't allowed to watch it.
oh
That's why I wasn't allowed to watch that, and I wasn't allowed to watch uh the the John Belushi one.
yeah,
Um
Animal House.
yeah, I wasn't allowed to watch that. Like there were like a lot of movies that I was, you know, not allowed to watch for those kinds of reasons.
Yeah, I mean, for whatever reason, Gone with the Wind was trending the other day, and the, the inevitable thing of this is a great movie, right? You shouldn't judge this by modern standards. And again, okay, first off, even Birth of a Nation, the
Mhm.
reason Andy was removed, the NAACP did protest these movies at the time, and these shows at the time, and obviously coming forward and questioning white people's entertainment choices was pretty risky
Mhm.
when you're already riding in the back of the bus. But still, it's like we don't need this. And yes, it's not just entertainment because your lost cause narrative is part of what's oppressing us in the South. So
Mhm.
they were kind of saying this at the time, but what always pisses me off is the idea of like, don't apply modern sensibilities. That's the only way that people watch things. Like you
Yeah.
sit back and you're watching as a modern person. It's not like I can take you and say, okay, well, 15-year-old kid who has grown up watching Marvel movies with special effects budgets of this, here, man, if you were my age, the Lou Ferrigno Hulk was the bomb, and you should like
Yeah.
approach it from 1970s kid, or like they would look at me. It's like trying to convince someone. I love Fred and Ginger movies, but they're
Yeah.
going to play very differently to audiences now. It's not like someone's a kid watching it. It's like, well, I would naturally be drawn to this black and white movie, slightly stilted staging and directing, if I wasn't applying my modern sensibilities to it. It's like, well, no, they just turn it off because they don't get
Yes.
it. It's just, and the same with jokes. I mean, like, okay, well, yeah, maybe laughing at fat people and trans people was, you thought that was funny at a time, but now we kind of don't.
Yeah.
And it's not like that we want to laugh, but we're being too woke not to laugh. We're just kind of like, what?
But at the same time, I mean, that's not even unusual historically. There was the line that was taken out of the famous line that was taken out of Duck Soup, I think it was. And the Headstrongs married the Armstrongs joke. And that was taken out of still horrifying, but
it kills audience. I mean, I've seen Duck Soup in theaters, and I saw it in Bryant Park. Used to show movies in the park when I was living there. They showed it there, and I've seen it in college and other places. Inevitably, the audience is having a great time. Whatever, it's like, because it's just not.
It takes you out of it, and you're like, funny. This is horrifying. But I've actually never. I don't think I've seen it with that line in it. The television version starting in the 60s, like what they took that out.
Yeah. Well,
because people back then, even at that point, people were like, no.
And the idea that it's somehow you're doing it to be PC as opposed to, I mean, look, audience, if you've ever done, theater and movies, you bring it before an audience and you do the dress rehearsal, and it's like, oh, that no one laughed. I'm cutting that out. Saturday Night Live does that now, right? They do the dress rehearsal. Okay, this skit bombed, it's out. This sketch bombed, it's out. And so it's the same thing of like, yeah, no one's gonna laugh at this line, so let's cut it out. It's not like being overly woke, but somehow it's this idea of like, you can't just say, well, yeah, that trans joke just isn't funny. That rape thing isn't. It's meant to be a laugh. I mean, and I've taught this before. It's like there was this TV show, Jennifer Jones, where we're trying to establish who she is, and she's kind of coming in, and she looks at this an overweight woman eating a cheeseburger. It makes a gross comment, and it's like, okay, well, your intent in that moment is to be, oh, isn't she funny? It's not like, and I think what happens, and you're failing the way you show it that way. I think what happens is that people will then be like, oh, well, not all characters are supposed to be perfect and flawed, so why can't we have the racist characters? Because, well, that's not what you're trying to do. You don't want us to not like this character. You want us to like the character. So that line doesn't work. I mean, there's some cases where it probably could work to keep a particularly awful line in. If we want to not like this person, fine. But in many cases, it's just like, no, we're having fun with Groucho, and now he just told a racist joke, and everyone's like, eh. Also, it's very confusing because like the epithet is like,
well, it's based on a song that like no one would know. And that there's layers to that. Like no one now knows that song. Was that like Sophie Tucker or something? Like no one's like, oh yeah, that is a big vaudeville hit. Like no, I mean I can say like people always bring up Blazing Saddles. Like no, you couldn't make Blazing Saddles now because no one knows who Hedy Lamarr is.
Yes,
like no one's gonna be like, oh, I see that she's doing a Marlene Dietrich impersonation there.
No one gets it. You just think, oh, this is Madeline Kahn and she's funny.
Yeah.
I think that's a case of where it became the roots of it. And it happens to a lot of art. It's like you just sort of get, oh, this is, but its roots and everything is sort of gone. And so it just doesn't, oh, why am I laughing about it? It would be very different. I mean, and this is a time where Westerns were very popular. So it's only a few years later. So yes, you could not make it today because you probably could not make a lot of
It
work.
wouldn't be the same kind of relevance. Like wouldn't be as relevant.
Could you
But
make
that's
Pulp Fiction
okay.
today? No. No, it'd be a very different movie
Yeah.
because times change and art changes. So
No one's like, yeah, we know all those Western movie tropes. I mean, some people do, but no one's like,
no, I mean, I think audiences kind of go in either the people who watch it now either get those jokes or they fundamentally understand. It's like, oh, this is Blazing Saddles with this
yeah,
whole thing. They might have no concept of what it's actually doing. I mean, there were people who said even at the time that Mel Brooks' Spaceballs failed because it was referencing something that was no longer,
yeah.
because at the times it had been a while since the last Star Wars movie. So they're like, why should I find this amusing? So, so what's going on for the coming week, Robyn? Will you be?
Um, I'm in Rhode Island right now, actually. So,
Where in the world is Robyn? That is a so no, not in Florida. Then you
uh,
were at
no,
your parents. Then now you're at a different part of Rhode Island.
no,
New
no, it's in New York. My parents
Rochester, a
live
different
in
part of.
Rochester, New York. Rhode Island is a different state.
Yes, I'm aware of, I'm aware of that. Yes, you're
I'm
right.
here for I came for my noni's 100th birthday.
Oh yeah,
So
she was on. Well, not
yeah,
really.
she was on the Today Show. She got to be on a jar and everything. Um uh Lost my train of thought here. I'm about to go to the best restaurant in the entire world, which is Twin Oaks, and I'm going to have baked stuffed shrimp, and it is going to be the best time. And then I will come back and figure out what I'm going to write for tomorrow. Then,
Wonderful. Well, have a great
Mhm.
time. Best to your and best to your Nani having
Yeah.
achieved. I guess along with Betty White, if Betty White had made it 100 years. Good old 1922. That's true. Well, again, thank you everyone for joining us, and I leave always saying Rhode Island's one of my favorite states. So
Yes. Rhode Island is famous for you, but no, not you're not from there. But it's a Blossom Dearie song, and it's really cute.